Welcome in our Delta, welcome in the Low Countries, and isn't it typical? Here you find a Dutch guy speaking English to you, about what? About the history of the Dutch language, a history which some people think is soon going to end because the language is going to be flooded by English. Nobody is going to speak any Dutch anymore really pretty soon. If that's the case, maybe we should try to find the pure Dutch language, which was not yet influenced by all these foreign factors. Let's go and try to do that. Let's go back in history then. Okay, so maybe 100 years ago, 20th century, maybe that was a period when the Dutch language flourished and we had lots of real Dutch speakers proud of their language. Well, no. In the 20th century was, among other things, a period in which some Dutch people started a very successful association which was called Onze Taal, our language. And their fight was not against English at the time. English was not, it's true, English was not so important at that time. English was not considered to be the big enemy. But we did have a big enemy. The big enemy was German. German is in certain ways even closer to Dutch than English is. And that was considered to be a problem. There's many words which the two languages have in common. And if Dutch had to be pure, we had to get rid of those German words. The word for preface in German is voorwoord. The same word in Dutch is voorwoord. It's too similar. It's a perfectly fine Dutch word in its own right. Voor and woord are both words. You put them together, you get another good Dutch word. But no, that was considered to be a bad word. What happened? Still, everybody says voorwoord. It was not successful. So people felt the threat, the same threat 100 years ago. And as a matter of fact, 100 years ago, also Dutch was spoken in our colonies, Indonesia, Suriname, etc. Why? Well, Dutch, it's true, Dutch have a kind of a funny way of dealing with their language, of politically dealing with their language. They never really wanted, for instance, the Indonesians to learn the language, or at least they were hesitant about it for a long time. In the 20th century, some changes came there and we started teaching Dutch to the people, but otherwise the feeling was no. Let them not learn Dutch because that's too dangerous. They might want to read Dutch books and get strange ideas in their heads. They might want to come to Europe. They might want to get a good job. We cannot give them a good job. We are going to learn their language. The result of that was, though, that we then actually adopted at least some of the words from colonial languages in our language. So we still say senang, which means happy, which is an Indonesian word. It's a very common Dutch word as well. So that's all fine. It's all very nice. You can hardly say this made the Dutch language very pure. So let's go back a little bit earlier to 1900, to the 19th century, I mean. So maybe we find a more pure language there. Well, the Low Countries are a delta. We have Germany on one side, we have England on another side, but we also are bordering on the French-speaking part of Europe. And in the 18th century and before, for a long time, French was an extremely important and extremely influential language in the Netherlands and in Flanders, in the Low Countries, in the Dutch-speaking part. And my colleague, Nicoline van der Sey, she has calculated once that we still have by far more loanwords from French than from any other language. Dutch was flooded with French words. People would go to French schools. People would read French newspapers. French was everywhere in everyday public life. So you can hardly say we were speaking a pure, nice language then. We have to delve deeper back, maybe. We go to the 16th, to the 17th century, a period when the Dutch language was clearly formed. Before we had dialects, now we needed to have our own standard language. We formed a nation, at least the Netherlands formed a nation, and we were proud of that nation. We wanted to show this by showing we had a real language which could stood the test of real languagehood. And there were purists. So there was a guy called Stevin who invented words for new sciences, so that in German, French, English you say mathematics, mathematique, but we in the Netherlands say wiskunde. We don't say physics, fysiek, we say natuurkunde. Those are translations of the Greek words to which the other languages refer. So there was a clear kind of purism going on, and it was successful in some fields. So wiskunde, natuurkunde, those are still the names of the subjects which you teach in school, or which you learn in school, which you learn in university, but in many other domains they were not successful at all. And at the same time they were also shaping the grammar of the language, and that language was purely modeled on Latin, because Latin, for instance, cases, so nominative, accusative cases, these kinds of things, we needed to have them as well, even though we no longer really had them, but we had to have a Latin grammar. Well, do you call Dutch with a Latin grammar, do you call that pure? I'm not sure. Plus, in the 16th, 17th century, we were influenced by many other cultures. We were getting fascinated by many other cultures. This was the time when Renaissance hit Northern Europe, Renaissance hit the Low Countries. Renaissance meant being fascinated by Dante, fascinated by Petrarca, fascinated by Italian authors, fascinated by the French writers of the Pléiade who imitated those Italian authors. And also we were occupied, we now say, by a Spanish power. There was Spanish coming in, there was French coming in, there was Italian coming in. Dutch poets wrote poems in Italian. Dutch viewers went to watch Spanish plays. This was not particularly a time when we were pure. Amsterdam was one of the capitals, or maybe even the capital of the West at that time. Extremely rich, extremely powerful. It attracted people from everywhere. It attracted Italian bankers who started the Italian banking system, and therefore in the end capitalism, and made Amsterdam the center of that. Amsterdam was a really multilingual city. The Netherlands, the Low Countries, were a really multilingual country at the time. There was nothing pure about it. So maybe we should set one step deeper still. Okay, let's do that. So we go to medieval times. Maybe we find purity there. They didn't speak Dutch. They spoke several kinds of dialects, but dialects are beautiful. Dialects are natural. Dialects are maybe finally really pure. Well, no. Latin was also spoken then. Latin was very important because of the church. French was very important for many parts bordering on France, and the borders with Germany were not clear at all, and neither were or are the linguistic borders. If you travel from wherever, from the coast, the Dutch coast, you travel to Berlin slowly, and you just listen to the dialects, they gradually change. There's not a big change at the German border. There is no pure concrete object which we could call the Dutch language there. There was no purity there. People use different dialects. People would use kinds of German-like dialects. People would translate texts from French and take over sometimes French-sounding syntax. There was really no purity there. We go back even like right to the middle of the medieval period, there we find the oldest texts of, there we find the oldest, we go back to 1100. There we find the first written texts of Dutch. So written Dutch, we basically have very little which is older than that. There's a kind of a mythical beginning of Dutch literature, which is a little rhyme, a little song which some monk wrote. Hebben olla wogala nestas higunan, have all birds nests begun. Hina seik andathu, except you and me. What unbidan we knew? What are we waiting for? That text should be so nice, so pure, so beautiful, and it isn't. It's a text which is written first by a West Flemish monk while he was in Kent. You can hear that the text was at that time still very close to English. The boundaries between Dutch and English were not so clear at all. And furthermore, he wrote that song and wrote immediately a Latin version of the same song on top of it. Probably the Dutch version is the original, but still there was this other language there. Still we find no purity. So maybe for purity we have to go back even further. We have to go back to the beginning of all of this 2000 years ago. Why don't we go back there and find pure Dutch? It was the beginning because this is Germanic tribes were getting in, but Dutch is a Germanic language. There were other languages spoken here, and these Germanic tribes got in touch with those other people. There were Romance speaking, Latin speaking people, vulgar Latin speaking people here, early modern French speaking people here. There were Celtic people here, and there was also probably some people here about whom we know very little, but who gave us at least a few words in our language. So it seems that all words starting with kne in Dutch, knaap, which means boy, may have come from their language. So maybe they spoke pure Dutch, but of them we have very little left. In other words, there is no end to Dutch. There has never been an end to Dutch. The Netherlands is a delta. Dutch is like the Netherlands, also a delta. It's a place where many things have come together. Is that a bad thing? I don't think so. And if you do think so, try to find some other language which is not a delta. As far as we know now, all languages, English definitely with its many French words, but all other languages to some extent have had a long history of contact with other people, with other languages, and being influenced by that. There is no purity in language. Language is not a countable thing. There's not one language and then another language. Language is a continuum. It's a beautiful continuum. It's a great continuum. It's a continuum which can teach us things about the history of this country, the history of humanity, but the lesson is not that purity can ever be achieved.